Okay, there we go. I hope you're all good and that you enjoyed watching the opera. If you haven't understood much of it or don't know what to get out of it, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure that you actually watched it so that today, when we do talk about it, we understand what's going on. So we're going to go over a lot of things today. So first of all, just talk about what is an opera. I mean, just in general, go over a few technical words and then just dive into the plot of that opera itself. So we're going to start with the most basic thing. So what is an opera? So if we see, I mean, it didn't look like something you haven't seen before in your life, right? So it looked like a theater, basically, where you have actors, singers, dancers. But the only difference from a play is that instead of speaking the script, you sing it. So if you notice, it's like a theater, but there is no talking. Everything is sung. This is, if you want, kind of really the definition of an opera, right? It's a play, but instead of speaking, you sing the entire time. So if you notice, it's kind of a multimedia experience that really brings together singing, music, acting, but also set designs and costume arts. In the modern age, we can even go to like lighting and sound effects. So if you notice, it really does bring so much different art fields together. Okay, so very simply, what is an opera? It's a play like a theater, but instead of speaking it, you just basically sing it. Just a few technical words that we're just going to go through before we attack that specific opera. So exactly like a play, you know, when you have a play, your play is divided into acts. So you have, let's say, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. And then each act is divided into scenes. So Act 1, Scene 1, Scene 2, Scene 3. Act 2, Scene 1, Scene 2, Scene 3. Right? This is exactly how the opera is divided. It's just like a theater. Now, sometimes before Act 1, we have something called prologue. The prologue, also, I'm sure you've seen this term maybe in books you read. Prologue is, if you want, what happens before the real start of the plot to kind of just put you in the mood. You know, for example, a lot of times when you watch movies, it starts with, let's say, 10 years earlier, they show you, for example, a car crash and everything's terrible. And then, you know, they go like 10 years later, and this is where the story starts. So these few minutes where you had the 10 years before, for example, it just puts you in the mood of the story to understand a bit the concept. So this is the prologue. And a lot of time, and as for the other one, a lot of times, sometimes the story ends and they show you like 5 years later, just at the end, just to, you know, kind of tell you a little bit what happens at the end, but this is rare. So prologue, acts, and scenes. So you need to know these few words. Another thing, in theater, you know, the text that you read, the dialogue, or in movies, it's called scripts. In opera, it is called libretto. So libretto is, if you want, the lyrics, but we cannot use the word lyrics, right? So we use the word libretto. So libretto is the text, the script that the singers are going to be singing. Okay, so just know that the opera is divided into acts, acts are divided into scenes, and the text that the singers are saying is called libretto. So this is what we need to know for now. So L'Orfeo that I've asked you to watch is actually the earliest opera ever written, or at least the earliest surviving opera. If there was one before, then we have no trace of it. We don't know it existed. But as a fully written opera, this is the earliest surviving one. So we are going back to 17th century Italy. So let me just let you know. So here we are at the end of the Renaissance, the beginning of the Baroque period. And it's really interesting to know a little bit the historical context of the opera and how it was done. So by the end of the Renaissance, early Baroque period, Italy was not like you know it today, so like a republic with like someone ruling over the entire country. So Italy was made from separate city-states, right? So each city had its own ruler. They could be a count, a baron, a prince, so someone ruling over that city-state. So for example, Rome was its own city-state and it was independent. You had Florence, that you know was, for example, ruled by the Medici family, which were very known bankers, for example. You had also Venice, which was also very important for everything that has to do with art and culture. Another city, which is the city in which this opera was made, was Mantua. On the other hand, you had, for example, the Vatican, that was, as you know, under strong rule of the Pope. And Rome back then was not as powerful as you know it today, because it was, at least art speaking, because it was completely under the influence of the Pope. But these other northern cities, more like Mantua, Florence, Venice, were more independent of the Pope, especially because they were very financially stable. And because of that, because they were more secular, if you want, and less under religious influence, they were really able to fully develop arts and especially culture without, you know, having to be so conservative. And they were very criticized by the Pope all the time, like, this is blasphemy, this is terrible what you're doing, and all that. So this is the context. So where we are right now, we are in Mantua, a beautiful, beautiful city in Italy, in which the composer Monteverdi was living. So the composer of this opera of L'Orfeo is called Claudio Monteverdi. If you downloaded the file I gave you, everything is written there. So just let me give you a small information about Monteverdi. So already at a very young age, he was an accomplished viola da braccio. That means a kind of the ancient violin, if you want, and a composer. He was very famous for his madrigals. Madrigals are kind of a song of the previous periods that are written for more than one singer on a poem, very, very expressive text. So he kind of published about 9 books of madrigals. So he was quite famous. He worked at basically the castle of the Duke of Mantua. So he was hired. So let's think about composers as a job, you know? It's not like modern days, oh, I want to be an artist and, you know, I fund myself. No, things didn't work like that. It was less artistic, more of kind of a job. So as a composer, you were either hired by the church or you were hired in the courts of a duke, prince, or nobility. And Monteverdi was basically, so his job was to write music for all occasions in the court. They could be religious ceremonies, they could be festive ceremonies, they can be for entertainment, or they just could be operas, which is in this case. So he has a salary, he is paid from the Duke, and his job is to write music. And this is where he basically remained most of his life. So very, very famous composer, has absolutely fantastic music. His name is Claudio Monteverdi. So the way it happened is that you have like kind of a group of nobles at the court, you know, and the people of the court were educated people, you know, they read a lot and, you know, they enjoyed art and culture. And they're like, you know, they were a group of gentlemen. They're like, how about we take the story, okay, Orfeo, which is a very famous story, by the way. Like, you know, it's, you know, one of these fables that everyone knows. And they're like, why don't we just set it to music and make it into a piece of theater? Oh, Monteverdi, go and write something for us. And that's literally the way it happens. And he wrote the entire opera. So I hope that this gives you at least a small context on Italy at the time and the conditions in which this opera was written. Do we have any questions until now, or something we don't understand? I'm assuming, sorry, Oscar, isn't Alessandro Stigio the writer? Yes, he is. He is one of these gentlemen. So he's the librettist, right? We need to use the word librettist. He's the one who wrote the libretto. And he is part of, you know, that group of gentlemen. So continuing, we're going to discuss now the story of the opera. So it's kind of a famous story, and that has been used in different pieces of theaters, different operas, art. It has been set in so many different ways. So very, very famous story. So here it goes. So you have Orpheus, which is our main character. And Orpheus is a half human, half gods, where we will understand later why half god. And he has a powerful gift, which is the gift of music. This is why whenever you see the character of Orpheus in paintings, he's always represented with a lyre, you know, the mini harp, like angels, he's always represented with it. And also in the opera, you can see him, he's always carrying it. And Orpheus falls in love with Eurydice, and they're like madly in love, and they get married. So everything is great, and nymphs and shepherds are all celebrating, I mean, the great love and the unbreakable love, etc. Until one day, one of the nymphs comes and announces the terrible news. And she tells Orpheus, I have terrible news for you. Eurydice is dead. She has been bitten by the snake and she didn't survive the poison and she's dead. So Orpheus is absolutely, he's so sad, he's so angry, and he is determined to go to the underworld to bring her. I don't know if you're familiar with like Greek or Roman mythology, but they believe that, you know, when you're dead, you go to the underworld. So you are carried on a boat. The boat crosses the river that takes you to Hades, which is the ruler basically of the underworld, of the world of the dead. And Orpheus goes down, and you know, he has someone accompanying them until they tell them, okay, I can't go further with you, you know. And you know, there's a sign that says, here no mortal shall enter, or they will not go out. But Orpheus is so courageous, he's like, no, I'm gonna go to the underworld, I can do it. And then over there, you know how you go to reach the underworld, you need to cross the river that leads you to the underworld. And there he meets Caronte, right? He's the ferryman of Hades. And he's like, please, can you take me to Hades? So to Pluto, basically. And he's like, no, no man can go there. No one can enter. And here, Orpheus decides to use his musical gift, which is the gift of music. So he starts singing this beautiful, magical song until Caronte falls asleep. Caronte falls asleep, and Orpheus rides the boat and he crosses the river while he's sleeping. And over there, he meets Pluto, the god of the underworld. And he's like, I'm here to get Eurydice back. Please, 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 can I have her back? And Pluto's like, you know what? Okay, but at one condition. While you're going all the way up from the underworld to the real world, Eurydice is not going to be walking next to you. She's going to be walking behind you. And not at any point can you look back to check if she's following you or not. So Orpheus is like, okay. So he starts walking. So Orpheus is here walking and Eurydice is here behind. They're walking. And while they're walking, he starts freaking out. You know, he's like, what if she's not there? What if it's a trap? And, you know, he just cannot resist the urge. He looks back and, well, he broke the deal. And Eurydice disappears and she's dead forever. So Orpheus goes back to the real world, but alone. He's lost his love, he's lost his bets. And here there are kind of two endings to the story. The ending in the version we are seeing is that his father, the god Apollo, which is the very famous god, also. So Apollo, the god of music, and Orpheus' father, comes down and takes him, and he's like, don't worry, Eurydice is always going to be with you. Even if you cannot see her in the earth, you are forever reunited in the stars, and all the stars you see is her. So at the end, he is reunited with his father, which is a god, and Eurydice, metaphorically, in the stars. So this is basically the plot of the story, which is a very famous story. And if you notice, it was recently adapted into Tony Award-winning musical. Really, I had no idea. That's really good to know. So this is a fable. So when we say fable, it has a moral. So we can see that there are different morals in the story. Like, what morals can you think about? What are the, moralistic themes that we can come up with from this plot? What do you think? No idea on what the moral of the story can be?
Maybe we can address the concept of love and how much you're willing to risk for love.
That's true. So how much are you willing to risk for love? That is true. And at the same time, listening, if you want, to authority versus listening to your instinct, right? Because here we have this whole duality of, like, he couldn't resist his own instinct rather than listen to authority. Very good. Desire. Death is the ultimate force. So this is dark, but maybe here, at least at the end, we get a little bit that at the end, like, his father comes and he rescued him. Very good. Blind faith. That's a very, very good. That's a very good point. So you need to have blind faith in the authority rather than your instinct. So all these are different morals that you can get out of the story. And back then, they were kind of a big fan of, what's the moral of the story, and not just get any story. So something that has a meaning. And of course, there's always the power of music, because music was important, and his weapon basically here is music. Do we have questions until now before I continue? Okay, I'm guessing not, so I'm going to continue. You've seen also that there are different, now we're going to skip a bit to another technical part. So first of all, the orchestra. If you've noticed, the orchestra is a little bit different than from what we've studied last week. If you've noticed, it is much smaller, with maybe a lot of instruments that we haven't seen before. Actually, the huge orchestra that we've seen together is kind of the modern or 19th century orchestra. Now we're all the way back in time. So the orchestra was not yet that much evolved, so it was much smaller. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to be looking at that. Great. So if we look here, you see my orchestra already is much, much smaller. Look how small it is. And there are some instruments that we probably haven't seen together yet. Like, for example, these we haven't seen. Look at this violin, has a weird shape. Also here a little bit. So let's already look at these instruments. So back then, in that period, there wasn't, if you want, the traditional orchestra. It was more of an ensemble. So here, if you look, these are the ancestors of the string family. We call them violone, So sometimes even they were all played like this, like the cello, but on your knee. You have those. which are called cornets. If you look here, there is like a piece of leather on the wood, and it has a very trumpety sound. So the cornets. This one, you're going to tell me maybe it looks like the oud. Well, during the Crusades, there was lots of exchanges with the East, and they brought that instruments and kind of developed it. So in Western music, it is called a lute, and it's an accompaniment instrument. And this one, the fiorbo, if you want, it's the bass version of this one, the harp, and another version of the organ. So we need to understand something about early music, so Baroque music, is that you know how like in our orchestra we kind of put the instruments in the form string family, woodwind family, brass family, percussion. Well, before, the instruments were kind of divided into two parts. You had the instruments that play the melody, the instruments that play the accompaniment. Think of like a rock band, right? You have the singer or maybe the lead guitar sometimes that take the solo, so they're the melody, but then you have the guitar, the bass guitar, and the keyboard, which are the accompaniment instrument, right? Unless they have a solo, which is exceptional. It's the same thing. So these instruments are divided into two categories. You have the instruments that play the melody. So for example, the violin, the flute, the recorder, the trumpet. These are the instruments that play a melody. Then you have all the instruments that accompany. The instruments that accompany, so that are there if you want just to provide the chord or the accompaniment, we call them continuo. I'm going to spell it down for you. So we call it continuo. Okay, so these are the instruments basically that accompany. Okay, Muhammad, what are the orchestra members in the mezzanine orchestra? Can someone mute their mics? Tariq, please, if you can mute. Okay, wait, I'm gonna mute you. Okay. Basically, you don't want the orchestras to be on stage because they're not part of the play. So this is why you put them in what we call an orchestral pit. So the continuo instruments are the instruments that accompany. And these include the ones I've just showed you. So they include these, okay? So the lute, the fiorbo, the harp, the organ, these are continuo instruments. You see, they're accompaniment instruments. But the cornet, the viols, the wind, like the flutes, recorders, oboes, cornets, these are all basically melody instruments because they provide the melody. Okay, so this is what I really want you to know concerning the orchestra and what it looks like. So we're going to start to see what is going on. Let's listen to the beginning of the opera and how it starts. If you want to open the link, go ahead. Just listen to the first 3 minutes, okay? And then we will talk about it together. Okay, so this, what you have just heard here, is called a toccata. Okay, so make sure you know that word. We call it toccata. It's all written for you, but anyways, I'm going to write it. So this is what we call a toccata. If you noticed, it was played 3 times. If you want to hear what he does, Monteverdi, it's like he's paying homage to the Duke of Mantua, because the melody you just heard, okay, is the melody that is for the Duke of Mantua. So imagine like it's a national anthem. And they played it 3 times. Once, basically to tell the audience we're starting. The second time to salute the audience. And the third time to salute the Duke himself. And after this, we start with the prologue. And the prologue is going to start. So if you want, this doesn't really count as part of the opera. The prologue starts here. If you've noticed, this melody that you've just heard, this small musical idea, is going to come back many times in the opera. So memorize that melody very well. We're going to call this a ritornello. Ritornello is a short musical passage that keeps recurring. And even if right now you might not understand why, at the end of this lecture, or basically maybe Monday's lecture, you will understand why these are important to keep in mind, because it's like the composer is giving you clues about the music. So the ritornello, this melody that you just heard, the ta di da 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 dum ta di da 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 dum, etc., is going to come back at different points. And because it's a melody that keeps coming back, we call it ritornello. Ritornello comes from, in Italian, means to return. It's a melody that keeps coming back. And then you have your first character that show, this lady. And if you notice, she's holding a lyre, which is the symbol of the power of music. So this character is called la musica, so music, okay? And look to what she's going to say. From my beloved premises I come to you, glorious heroes, noble bloodline of rulers, of whom fame relates high praise, without quite attaining the truth, as it is too high a mark. I am music. So this is, we call, see one paragraph, we call this a stanza. After the first stanza, you're going to notice that here, the ritornello will come back. I am music, who in sweet accents can make peaceful every troubled heart, and so with noble anger and so with love can I inflame the coldest minds. Ritornello. Singing with my golden lyre, I like to charm now and then mortal ears, and in such fashion that I make their souls aspire more for the resounding harmony of the lyre of heaven. Ritornello. Hence desire spurs me to tell you of Orfeo who tamed wild beasts with his song and made Hades answer his prayers to the immortal glory of Pindens and Helicon. Then the ritornello plays again. While I vary my songs, now happy, now sad, no small bird shall move among these bushes, nor on these banks a sounding wave be heard, and every breeze shall stay its wanderings. Okay, so here what she's doing, she's kind of presenting herself, telling you, I am music, and she's kind of narrating the beginning. So now what to expect, you know, she's telling you what to expect from the story. Like, I'm going to tell you about Orfeo who beats beasts, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to show you how this melody keeps recurring again and again. So she starts singing. If you notice, when she's singing, what instruments are playing with her? Did you pay attention what instruments are playing with her? Which strings? Be more specific. Sure, listen.
Can we hear it again? Sorry.
It sounds kind of like, yeah, very good. It sounds more like a harp or like, you know, a guitar-y instrument, right? So take it as a rule. When someone sings, it's always one of the continuo instruments that are playing, right? So you usually have the theorbo, the lute, the harp, plus cello and bass, which provides usually the bass line. So again, think of a rock band. You have the bass guitar that gives you the bass line. Then you have the regular guitar and the keyboard that give you the chords. It's the same thing. You always have the cello or the bass that play the bass line, and the theorbo, lute, harp that basically strum the chords. But I never have a violin, a flute when someone is singing. Why? Because there are melody instruments. Here I have a voice taking the instruments. Listen now. See how the ritornello came back? And here, when she stops singing, then the violins and the flute, the other melody instruments, come back. Well, it's plucked instruments, Carl, but you know, the lyre, since it's very small, I mean, the sound will be very high pitched, right? Imagine it's a very high pitched harp. So we see here how the ritornello returns. Then she goes into her second verse. Okay, so she's going to sing 5 paragraphs. We're not going to hear them all. Okay, so basically she introduces herself, greets the audience, and we can hear how the ritornello keeps coming back every single time. Let's talk a little bit about her voice. So she's now here in this video, we're seeing women, but you guys know that women could not sing back then, right? So all parts were played by men. And usually men were castrated. Yes, I know it's illegal now, but basically what they used to do is that they would cut their genitals out and their voice would never hit puberty. Now that's a horrible crime for the body, but back then it was something kind of like important. Guys, the session is going to end, so I'm going to stop it and we go into the other link I sent you. Okay, so just